comrades, and those who have been inspired by the works of Walter Rodney. Indeed, it's a special year. This year marks the 80th birth anniversary of Walter Rodney, and also 50 years since the magnificent work, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, was published.
Hello comrades, my name is Mwaivu Wakaluka from the Walter Rodney School in Kenya, and today as we mark 50 years anniversary of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, this is a very good book, and it is a book that has influenced many African scholars. It is a book that has influenced many African activists, and unlike many other scholars, Walter Rodney uses historical and dialectical materialism to look at underdevelopment, because he does not look at underdevelopment in isolation, but he tries to look at underdevelopment in its relation to the developed world. And we can see that before then we had bourgeois and racist scholars who tried to look at underdevelopment of Africa as something that is God ordained, or something that lies in the backwardness of Africa, as they would call it. But we can see that Walter Rodney debunks this narrative, these false narratives, these racist narratives, and he looks at underdevelopment of Africa with its relation to the developed countries. And in his book, he even uses historical materialism because he traces it back from the time of slavery to the time of mercantilist imperialism to the stage of the development of capitalism in the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and even post that, where he looks at the times of the World War I, World War II, and even to the time of multilateral imperialism. And we can see that these trends of exploitation have not changed, and we cannot even look at how Europe or how the North has developed without looking at how it has, in what relation it has developed to other nations, for example, even to nations in Africa and also in Asia, because we can see that these exact nations, the ones we call that developed or the industrialized countries, have been exploiting the African economies through cheap labor, through exploiting our natural resources.
My name is Irene Asua. I am a member of Ukombozi Library. My reflection on Walter Rodney will be on the role of intellectuals in advancing people's struggles and people's political ideology. Walter Rodney came from Guyana to Africa, grounded with students at the Jerusalem University, and even became a lecturer, and while at it wrote very revolutionary works, one of them being How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And Walter Rodney is an inspiration to the new generation of intellectuals, and the role we need to play in being very clear on our political ideology, and using our platforms to advance political struggles, and grounding with people as Rodney did, not alienating ourselves from the people. And Walter Rodney inspires us, but it is sad that at the moment we have very few intellectuals that are like Walter Rodney. Intellectuals who can experientially write about people's struggle and give it a political angle. Instead, we have intellectuals who have become grave diggers for capital. And so instead of supporting the people, we are supporting capital to create neoliberal policies that privatize and commodifies the things that people need. So Walter Rodney inspires us as intellectuals to use our capacity to advance people's struggles, to take back our learning institutions as sites of struggle and places for ideological discourse.
Brian from the Walter Rodney Mapinduzi School here in Kenya. and also from the Communist Party of Kenya. We are greatly honored and greatly inspired to participate in the seminar marking 50 years since How Europe Underdeveloped Africa was published. Basing the analysis on the Tanzanian society and project them to the conditions of Africa then, Walter Rodney's text remains very relevant in a contemporary society, especially here in Kenya, because basing the analysis, basing the analysis here in Kenya, we get that a lot of questions on development and underdevelopment are characterized, by domination from Western powers. As it was on that time, and Walter Rodney clearly expounds on the role that Africa played in the development of capitalism and of the development of capitalism in Europe and of course the rest of the world. We get that the things have not changed, the conditions are still the same, because development is also characterized by the world market, and finance capital. That being the case, we get that there is a lot of entrenchment of the private sector even in accessing basic commodities, like healthcare and food, because they are profit dominated, because the world market dictates that it is a world of accumulation and profit. So we get that the contemporary text is of course very powerful in analyzing what our conditions are. We are very inspired that basing his analysis in a Tanzanian society, we are marking 100 years of the contributions of Mwalimu Nyerere, 80 years of the contributions of our example Walter Rodney, and 50 years of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So in the dialectical method that Walter Rodney uses in his analysis of the African society, we get that it also happening at a very opportune time, at a very timely period, where we should fathom, where we should fathom this thought, and we get that even back then the questions of development were characterized by class, by the class aspect, by the class contradiction, which also is the case in today Kenya. Just that we have had the emergence of a comprador bourgeois who acts as an agent of the imperial powers. The dialectical method of the analysis that Walter Rodney uses is of course very interesting, because he insists on the connection of our past historical struggles to our present struggles and the struggles. So we understand that the development of the society is dialectical, and the lens that we should use in analyzing the development of the society are dialectical materialism. And this is the time that the document should urge us, and of course should inspire us to break away from imperialism, in the highest stage of capitalism, to break away from imperialism and to disengage from the world market.
Many salutes to Comrade Walter Rodney for the great works that he did. And today we celebrate his 80th birthday, and also today it is 50 years since he published the book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. We celebrate him for the great work he did in educating us on imperialism, capitalism, and the struggle, the class struggle. We are here seated today, 50 years later, facing the same struggles that Walter Rodney has highlighted in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. We are here facing the same struggle. Capitalism is still dominating, imperialism is still dominating.
Ladies and gentlemen, Walter Rodney is an iconic revolutionary, and he has written a book on how Europe underdeveloped Africa. And this is the 50th anniversary of the writing of the book of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and the 80th anniversary of Walter Rodney. And even as we study this book in the Communist Party of Kenya study circles, we delve deep into how Europe underdeveloped Africa. My name is Sefusani, and there are 4 components about how Europe underdeveloped Africa. The first component would be to delve into what is development. Development in a human society is a many-sided process, and at the level of the individual, it implies increased skill and capacity. It implies greater freedom, creativity, self-discipline, responsibility, and material well-being. the achievement of any of those aspects of personal development is very much tied in the state of the society as a whole. And as this happens, the relations which develop within any given social group are crucial to an understanding of the society as a whole. That is the freedom, responsibility, skill, etc. They have real meaning only in terms of relations of men in the society. So that brings us to our second point. What is underdevelopment? Underdevelopment is not the absence of development, because every people have developed in one way or another, and to a greater or lesser extent. Underdevelopment makes sense only as a means of comparing levels of development, and it is very much tied to the fact that human social development has been uneven, and from a strictly economic point of view. So some human groups have advanced further by producing more, and they have become more wealthy. This is the comparative narrative. That is to say that human beings have battled with their material environment. They've created forms of social relations, forms of government, patterns of behavior, and systems of belief, which together constituted the superstructure, which was never exactly the same in any two societies. The situation in Africa is that Africa has not yet come anywhere close to making the most of its natural wealth, and most of the wealth now being produced is not retained within Africa for the benefit of Africans. And what is the reason of underdevelopment in Africa? So first we see that the answer is that the operation of the imperialist system bears major responsibility for African economic retardation by draining Africa wealth and by making it possible to develop more rapidly the resources of the continent. And the second reason is one has to deal with those who manipulate the system and those who are either agents or unwitting accomplices of the said system. The ones who have actively extended their exploitation from inside Europe to cover the whole of Africa. And that is a brief preview of how Europe underdeveloped Africa.
Hello comrades, my name is Ezra Otieno, and today as we commemorate Walter Rodney's 80th birthday, we want to remember a great intellectual who lived and died in life for the life of the struggle. I specifically want to talk about how Europe underdeveloped Africa and how he highlighted the effects of imperialism and dependency as we see it in Africa. He talked about exploitation in terms of trade and exploitation in terms of imperialism, because Africa gets bad trade deals, and also foreign investment is disguised as good business for us, but it's basically imperialism. We in Africa condemn this, and we use this to ground ourselves and to develop ourselves and know that what Rodney wrote and what Rodney lived for and what he taught is what guides us as revolutionaries today, and we live by this and we use this to shun neocolonialism. Long live Walter Rodney.
Greetings, my name is Olunga, and in the eve of marking the 80th birthday of Walter Rodney since he was born, I think it's important to commemorate Walter Rodney not only as a historical scholar but also a revolutionary thinker and someone who laid the foundation in trying to understand the challenges and the exploitation that mother continent Africa underwent in the hands of Europeans. And 80 years since he was born, and also historically 50 years since he wrote his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And I think it's important to understand the concept of this book 50 years later since it was written, because it gives us the overview of how we can connect the political power and economic exploitation that Africa has undergone in the hands of Western European powerhouse and America. And I think Walter Rodney also teaches us a lot of important things, like how well are we able to relate with one another in our different spaces. If you read his books, how Groundings with My Brothers that he wrote, I think in the 70s, Walter mentions a very basic concept on how you are able to understand your class reality. And this class he discusses in the way of how can you understand your class conditions and that of your race. Because remember, Walter being a revolutionary radical, organizing and also teaching in North America, where racism was also a major part of the oppression there, he was able to merge race analysis and class analysis, and takes us back to how the great Frantz Fanon also was able to intermingle these terms. So 8 years since Walter Rodney was born, I think his teachings, his ideology, political philosophy, historical analysis, and radical education that he impacted in Africa and also in America is very vivid among us, and is something that we have to continue cherishing and remembering him forever. Because Walter Rodney, in as much as he was killed by the imperialists, his spirit, his ideas, and his body and will always live for us. Forward, and long live Walter Rodney.
Hello, my name is Maganga. I belong to the Central Committee of the Revolutionary Socialist League, which organizes for socialist revolution not only in Kenya, not only in Africa, but across the world. Or rather how I perceive Walter Rodney is as someone who dedicated his life, his energy, his time towards organizing for that same goal, realizing the liberation of the African people in particular, and all the oppressed people in the world in general. The relevance of how Europe underdeveloped Africa is something that must be said at this particular point, especially. And the reason is how Europe underdeveloped Africa connects the issues, the concrete situation that faces the people of Africa today with the root causes of those problems, of those issues. What are these problems and what are these root causes? Africa faces poverty, underdevelopment, unemployment on a massive scale, oppression and exploitation, basically. And what is the root cause of this situation? The root cause of this situation is a system which is designed to extract resources, to oppress, to use and exploit the labor of the working people, and appropriate this, or rather use this in the benefit of a small minority. And this is something that Walter Rodney recognizes and explains very, very clearly in how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Africa's underdevelopment cannot be viewed without looking at the centuries of enslavement, of colonization, of exploitation that have occurred over the centuries. This is something that Walter Rodney explains very well. What is the way forward? The way forward is for African people to come together speedily, form an all-African revolutionary front, and overthrow this system that puts them exploited and oppressed. That is the solution, and that is what we must be organizing towards. And that is what I'm engaged in, and what Organic Intellectuals Network organizes towards.
Thank you very much. This is a piece called Education for Freedom. It's about Walter Rodney. He would have been 80 this year, and on the 50th anniversary of his very powerful, influential How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So it is a privilege and an honor to address you about the legacy of Walter Rodney in relation to his monumental 1972 classic, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I want to focus in on the book's pedagogical intent and focus on Rodney's aim for the book to constitute a part of an education for freedom. At the very outset of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Walter Rodney makes clear that the book is very much oriented towards the present. He writes, "This book derives from a concern with the contemporary African situation. It delves into the past only because otherwise it would be impossible to understand how the present came into being and what the trends are for the near future. This sentiment is reminiscent of Bob Marley's line in the song Buffalo Soldier. If you know your history, then you would know where you're coming from. Then you wouldn't have to ask me, who the hell do I think I am? Rodney attempts to provide a schematic overview in the book that allows for a corrective to so many racist lies and so much imperialist propaganda. Lies and propaganda that cloud the historical orientation and collective consciousness of African people to this day. As Leo Zielik has argued, Rodney's intellectual and activist mission was to correct the lies of official history, or as Eduardo Galeano described his own undertaking, to tell a non-specialized public about certain facts that official history is told by conquerors, hides their lies about, and to give back to the continent and its people a proper account of how Africa had become underdeveloped, poor and dependent. Furthermore, as Carol Boyce Davies has also argued, for Rodney this knowledge was essential for black people's well-being, to give them an understanding of past achievements and the present-day need for consciousness. The book was thus intended for a much broader audience than is the typical academic text. Indeed, as Rodney himself would later explain, this text was designed to operate outside of the university. It might get into the university, yes, I hoped it would, but it was designed to operate from outside in the sense that it would not be sponsored by the people who considered themselves, and whom many others considered to be the ones at the time who had the last word on African history and African studies. The aim of this publication was to reach our own people without having it mediated by the bourgeois institutions of learning. So what about the content of the book? As Lee Wengraf has highlighted, in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Rodney situates himself in several theoretical traditions. The writings of Caribbean revolutionary Frantz Fanon, the dependence theories of André Gunda Frank and others, the Pan-Africanist tradition including George Padmore and C.L.R. James, and African socialism as popularized by national leaders such as Tanzania's Julius Nyerere and Guinea's Ahmad Sekou Touré. Furthermore, as Zielik has emphasized, Rodney's book is a breathless journey across the continent, over a period of 500 years, moving effortlessly from country to country, region to region, providing both nuanced analysis and general overview. Moreover, as Andy Higginbottom has also stressed, Rodney's book takes forward the Marxist theory of dependency and underdevelopment from a Pan-Africanist perspective. It is a sign of the range and depth of the book that there are at least 3 major debates that it enjoins with various historians, all apologists for European imperialism. The first debate concerns the specific destructive awfulness of the European slave trade. The second debate is over whether Europe benefited economically from the late 19th century scramble for Africa and the colonial regimes that were installed. The third debate concerns the intersection of race and class, the position of the African working poor, and the nature of their exploitation under the European colonial regimes. So what is the main argument of the book? As Higginbottom has again aptly summarized, it is that Africa's poverty and underdevelopment are not due to any intrinsic social or biological attributes of Africans, but arise from systemic predatory external relations that have in turn become internalized. While some of the specific mechanisms changed, the book's central message is that for centuries, European capitalist imperialism exploited Africa.
Comrades Viva, revolutionary greetings, comrades. Today we commemorate the 80th birthday anniversary of Walter Rodney and the 50th anniversary since the writings of Walter Rodney on How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Today we continue to face the crisis of imperialism and capitalism that Walter Rodney really condemned, and we also acknowledge the role of Walter Rodney in regards to Pan-Africanism, solidarity. And we understand that Africa is not free without the aspect of also the international solidarity. We understand that also that Europe has developed due to the fight of black people. You know, it is due to also the exploitation of black people. So it is until we black people unite internationally wise, Africa, and even ensuring that we continue to fight for the national democratic right, that in the context of today's Kenyan situation, we understand that Kenya is the embedded imperial and capitalistic state, that we continue to see us living in a society that every day we are oppressed. We are living by this situation every day.
Kwa hii nini yetu, kwa community zetu tuna face pollution, story ya plastic pollution, na ni unakuta hizi vitu zililetwa na hawa watu kutoka the colonizers, unapata kuna air pollution, garbage pollution. Hizi vitu zilikuwa tu very alien kwa hawa watu wa kutoka Afrika.
Comrade Power. Revolutionary greetings. I'm glad to be joining you today to discuss about Walter Rodney. We understand that this will be his 80th birthday anniversary, and as well 50 years since the publishing of his book, one of his best works on how Europe underdeveloped Africa. I'm glad that we discuss on some of the pertinent issues that affect us today, and we understand that some of these realities stem from the capitalist system and its metropoles gathered all over the world. We want to kind of give out solidarity messages to every proletariat, every worker who feels bogged down by this imperialist system, understanding that we still suffer through the same vices that Walter Rodney talked about 50 years on.